Welcome, everyone, on behalf of the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies of the University of Groningen. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this college tour. We have a very special guest today. It's a great honor to introduce to you our Royal Highness, Prince Jaime de Bourbon de Parma, Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to the Holy See in Rome. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
He will be interviewed by Dr. Brenda Bartelink from our faculty, and she will lay out the ground rules, and from there on, she's in charge. On either sides, there are students with microphones, and I hand my microphone now to Kira Tiana. And I hope you all will have a wonderful time.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to take you back to the time where you were a student.
Okay.
The students here are in all disciplines: religious studies, theology, international relations, business, law. You were a student once, and what were your career plans? And did you ever envision to become an ambassador to the Holy See for the Netherlands?
No. The last, I would probably, when I was a student, wouldn't be part of my list to be ambassador to the Holy See. I was really already, when I was in your place, I was very much socially motivated. So I really wanted to do something for society, to make an impact for society. And first I thought I would focus more on development studies, to focus on development aid. But I thought I'm too impatient for that, because you have to actually live in a country for 10 years at least to have enough bond to actually to be part of that society and work together on these issues. And because my grandfather always, from both sides, talked a lot about the Second World War, I knew that peace in Europe was something that should not be taken for granted. You've only known peace, I've only known peace. But if you look outside of Europe, there's war all over the place. So we can't take it for granted, and peace, as many people have said, is hard work to maintain it. So I thought conflict management, that's more something for me. The other thought I had was, because I draw and paint a lot, was maybe to become an artist. So my student time was to figure out if I want to become an artist or do something with conflict management. And I finally continued with conflict management, but creativity is an important element of diplomacy, so I can use it. Yeah.
Thank you, and I'm pretty sure we will be introduced to your creativity in the current role you have. I want to hand over to the first student who is asking a question today, and that's Jari van den Berg.
So I'm studying international relations, and I was wondering, since most people end up mostly in the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs through the Diplomat class, the Diplomatenklasje in Dutch, are there any other ways to become an ambassador, or and if so, how?
So yes, the most direct way of entering diplomatic service is het klasje. So you have to go through a selection process, some exams, and some interviews, and then you're selected. You don't have to study international relations to enter the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There's people, all kinds of backgrounds, and we want a very diverse group of diplomats, because that makes us more effective worldwide. Some countries have diplomats that are politically appointed. US do that. We have a fully career diplomacy, so you really have to go through the klasje. Sometimes what we do have is now more and more exchange with other ministries. If you work for a Ministry of Interior or Ministry of Defense or deal with environmental issues in the Netherlands, you can shift and become a diplomat at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we're opening up in that sense, but it's quite direct. But the goal is never, it seems always that being an ambassador is the goal of your career, but it's all about influence and impact. I used to work in Afghanistan. I was the special envoy, I was the political advisor of the commander. I was the only civilian in a light blue shirt between all the short-haired military guys. And there in Afghanistan, in the mountains, I had at least as much impact than I have now. And that's as cool a job as you can have. But if you love culture, you can work in cultural affairs in an embassy. So there's many other goals in the ministry than just becoming an ambassador. There's only about 200 ambassadors, about 2,000 people work in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it's seeing. So, but to answer your question, the klasje is the way to go, and it's a really cool, diverse job. Yeah.
Well, we can already tell from the question that there's some interest in the room, at least. Thank you. So, as a student, you had an interest in conflict management, and you already mentioned your posting in Afghanistan. You also been in Iraq, so you definitely have worked on conflict management. Currently, you're an ambassador to the Holy See. Maybe you can explain to us what kind of role is that, and maybe also just guide us a little bit into what an average day of a work day of an ambassador to the Holy See looks like.
Okay, very good. As an ambassador, I represent the Netherlands, so all the interest of the Netherlands towards the Holy See. And the Holy See is, say, the governing body of the Catholic Church. So I'm not so much an ambassador to the Vatican, which is just a 450 by 450 meters territory, smallest state in the world. But I'm an ambassador to the whole international Catholic network worldwide. So you can compare it a little bit like the United Nations. You wouldn't be an ambassador to the headquarters of the United Nations, but through the whole United Nations system. And how a day looks like, one part of my day is always gathering information, because there's 220,000 Catholic, churches around the world, 220,000. So in every village where you see a church, there's someone with a cell phone you can call for information. And in countries where information is very difficult to get, for instance, if you look, say, in northern Nigeria, or if you go to Afghanistan, or now in Syria where we don't have diplomatic, no embassy anymore because of the war, in Aleppo where there's hardly any war correspondent who dares to go there, then we can call sisters that are working there. And there's a couple of sisters from Argentina living there who I used to call, were there before the war, they'll stay during the war, and they'll stay after, risking their lives because they said, we have about 14 girls we're taking care of. What happens to them if we leave? So they decide to stay. And so I call them and ask them information, what's happening, what are you seeing, and we get context. And I give them information of how we see the security context so that if they really have a need to leave, that they'll know how we view the situation, and there's a fair exchange. So this is one of the most fine-mazed information networks in the world. And so gathering information now on Central African Republic, there's news that there might be genocide type of developments going on. The UN has warned that this is happening. So we'll call with the local priests there to ask what is happening, and there's a fantastic bishop and imam working together in bridging the gap and building a coalition of the middle and not of extremes, and to see if they need support or anything else. So listening, gathering information, but also giving information back is part of the day. The second part is it's not just a listening network and we write reports back and forth. It's also an action network. There is about 165 Catholic aid organizations active that come together in the Vatican. And they work in 200 countries. So is there a possibility of working together with them? Or introduce the business world to the Vatican. Businessmen are cowboys. They think short term and gain is the aim. And if you look at a priest, long robe, long term, and values based, it's two totally different worlds. Yet I see that there's a lot of complementarity, because if business wants to be more of a social business, and the church talks about moral values and has a platform specifically with this Pope, businessmen want to be associated with him. So there's a huge pull factor. So I organize a whole series of events on climate and business and other social issues in business to see if we can create a win-win situation. So that's my day. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and yeah. I'm sure we'll touch upon some of the topics you've already mentioned. Okay. So that's very nice. I think you painted a picture of the Vatican not being this particular geographical spot, but actually also a fenster or a window to the world, so to say. And in that sense, it's a strategic place to be also as a diplomat, which is, I think, very interesting and revealing. We want to, on that scope, ask you another question, and that's Nienke Soelman, who has prepared that question, please.
My name is Nienke Soelman. I'm a theology student. I want to ask you, the Pope does a lot of effort to establish religious dialogue over the world, and to what extent is it important to have knowledge about other world religions and cultures?
It's very important to have that tendency. Who had thought that theology would be in vogue what you're studying or what you're interested in, why, because you're in this room, is something that is growing, and I noticed that it's growing mostly in your age group. If you talk to older generations, there is either an adversity, they push back against institutional religion, at least in the West, and then there's a whole group that is totally indifferent. And then we see in the younger age a renewed interest. If you just follow the news and you don't have a preset prejudice, you tend to just ask questions like you do, and I see there's a lot of interest. I have always an intern at the embassy. My embassy, by the way, is the smallest in the world. Is me, a part-time secretary, and an intern. So now I'm working with my number 7 intern, and she actually studied here in Groningen, theology and history of religion, and she's a fantastic. Started 1 week, is already doing fantastic job. So I have a great impression of students here, but the interest is there. So at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we have a course which we developed on Islam, which Leiden University is doing, and it's tremendously popular amongst diplomats. But that's the exotic other religion that people want to study. I would suggest that people study also Christianity more, for 2 reasons. One, it's just historically interesting to understand your own society better, the history of your society. But second, if you learn Christianity, it's in a way easier. It's like learning a new language. It's easier to learn German for a Dutch person than Japanese. But once you've learned the closer by religion, which would be Christianity, it's from there on a lot easier to study other religions as well. So I would say don't neglect Christianity and don't only focus on Islam, although Islam is the fascinating study point, but also I would say Christianity, don't underestimate it. I find often that Christian aid organizations or San Egidio is a Catholic organization on interreligious dialogue, that they are able to do that dialogue better than I could as representing a secular government. So and so knowing them, understanding them better, working with them can be a huge effect. So yes, so everybody who studied anything with religion in this room, I think you have a comparative advantage. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. So what you also mentioned in terms of your role is the importance of being a diplomat, also working with other actors in society, civil society organizations, religious organizations, the church, etc. And you also mentioned that there's actually an interest in religion. You mentioned young people that are much more open. I think we have also seen statistics from Pew Forum, amongst others, that predict that in 2050, 60% of the world population will be either Muslim or Christian, and most of the world population will be affiliated with religion. Only in Europe and the US, a decline is predicted. And of course, as academics, we're also always a bit critical about statistics, but let's work with them for now. And how do you see the role of the church, the Catholic Church, or maybe other religious organizations in society, given this background?
So as you said, in the Netherlands and in Europe, it's declining, the role. It's still a valuable role, so don't write it off, but it's declining. So the church will have to reinvent itself and how to reconnect within the West, say, so in Europe. But the rest of the world is growing, as you said, and it plays a more and more important role. And that has everything to do with demographics. Families with a religious background have more children. And therefore, demographics will always are beating, say, the rationalism of the West. People think that if you go to schools and then later to universities, we become more rational, and that the religion plays a lesser role. And that might be true, but demographics, so having children in religious family, is a faster trend. So we're graying out the secular world, and therefore it's very good to be open to what's out there. And that's what I always say in following your question, that we don't have to become more religious per se, because it has to be your own conviction, but we have to be religious literate.
Religious literate, I think that's an important word, and we will come back to that. I wanted to, the question on the role of the church of religion, of religious organizations in society that you touched upon already. I think we also see that in the way the Vatican and Pope Francis has related to issues of migration, for example. And we have another question on that topic by Ananda Klopstra. Where are you?
Yeah, my name is Ananda, and I'm in the master program Religion, Conflict and Globalization. And I was wondering to what extent the Holy See is involved in migration problems, and what your part specifically as ambassador to the Holy See is concerning issues of migration and refugees.
So migration is one of the main topics of Pope Francis. He went to visit, one of the first visits he did was to Lampedusa, an island off the coast of Italy, where a lot of migrants were arriving. And in the Northern Europe, at least in Southern Europe, there was a lot of tension on migration. We were ignoring the issue. It was an issue, but it wasn't as prime on our agenda as it is today. So migration is a big topic for Pope Francis. My role is to foster that dialogue between how we view, our government views migration, and how he views it. He says, don't forget, these are people. Migrants are not the problem. They're fleeing the problem, which is conflict and absolute poverty. So have empathy with them and always treat them not as statistics, but as human beings, families, etc. But in dialogue with us, we've seen that he's been adapting his speech from absolute harboring anyone who needs help to saying there's limits to an absorption capacity also in Europe, and that has a grave concern. And there's also responsibilities of migrants to have to learn the local language, local customs, and abide to the local laws. And so there's been a migration also in evolution of his speeches on migration, and that's a result of dialogue. So we try to bridge the point of view in the Netherlands and there, and influence both sides, and try to translate what the one is saying to the other one, so that they can actually listen to it and adapt their point of view, get a more sort of balanced view. So that's our role. Another role is a lot of Catholic, for instance, because I'm working in that environment, Catholic organizations are incredibly important to treat the root causes of migration and conflict. For instance, the universities in the Middle East, but also in Syria and Lebanon and neighboring countries, the Catholic universities have Sunnis and Shiites there, and they don't make a distinction. So it's a neutral platform for them to come together. And some people I spoke said, I'm a Muslim in my heart, I'm a Jesuit in my head. And so they get a more plural sort of education and worldview. So it's very important. Same for the hospitals. Anybody can go there. You don't have to be of one or the other group to be allowed in. And then lastly, also the aid organizations. 70% of the aid through Catholic aid organizations in the Middle East goes to Muslims. So it's not like in the past that only if you were a Catholic or an aspiring Catholic you get aid. That's a long time ago. That's the vision we have of it. But it's really quite neutral and quite effective. So it's in a way the glue in society that is now eroding. And our prejudice that helping a faith organization to do aid, we're very shy of it because we're afraid it would be partisan. But actually, if you really study it, it's okay. So I'm trying to bring that new idea back to my ministry, back to my country, back to my colleagues, to study facts and not just our preconception on these issues. Yeah.
Thank you so much for answering that question. I think very interesting also the way you enlarged perspective from Europe and questions around migration to also consider Middle East and indeed the reach of the church, the role that religious organizations play. We move on to another topic that you already spoke about in relation to the first question asked, and that is the role of business and economy. And our next question is by Andrea de Graaf. Is she here? Okay, I still want to ask the question.
Yeah, please.
Because you already spoke in your first question about the importance the role you can play as a diplomat, also working with Catholic institutions, with the Vatican, and also with business and economy. And perhaps you can reflect on that in the sense of what have businesses to gain of working with the Vatican, but also on the other hand, what can the Vatican gain, for example, in working on issues of migration, but perhaps climate, you mentioned already, on a better relationship with the business world?
So the business world, I said it already, they're very practical and pragmatic. The Catholic Church, the Pope reaches 1.3 billion, potentially reaches 1.3 billion Catholics, which is 17.8% of the world's population. There's as many Catholics around the world, or nearly as many as we have Chinese in the world. So if that were really one group, you could say that it would be the biggest soft superpower compared to the hard superpower of China. No, but so it's a significant group he can reach, and the businessmen are part of those. But this Pope has reached not just to Catholics, but also a lot of Protestants like his style of simplicity and going back to basics and focusing on those who don't have a voice, and so on the poorest of the poor, or our planet, creation. So he's a voice for those who don't have a voice. And so a lot of Protestants like him, but also a lot of people who don't believe in God. A lot of my friends say he's a moral leader. Who else is a moral leader today? A couple of people, but he definitely is one of those. And he's quite rare, and he's an authentic leader. So what he says, he actually does. So people believe him. And I've met him a couple of times, and he really is what you see. What you see is what you get. So it's so also the businessmen want to be associated with this movement. A lot of businessmen from the US actually are flocking to the Vatican, because with Trump, they don't feel that he's reflecting their moral values. So they're looking for another moral leader. And even though they might not be Catholic, they would love to work with Pope Francis. So you see a whole new beginning. So I've helped organize now 2 events. There'll be a third one on impact investing, which is investing in projects that are profitable, but also have a very clear goal of having a social impact.
Can you give an example, maybe?
So online education for everybody. Or you could on solar panels, or you could focus on responsible sourcing of biocotton. So anything that has a social impact besides just profit, those people will come then to the financiers of that would come together in the Vatican and feel inspired by Laudato Si. Laudato Si is a document the Pope wrote. It's a letter. But a thick letter, in a way to simplify it on climate and poverty. But it's much more complex. It's a fantastic read, by the way. Many of you have a background in religious studies. I hadn't, and I could read it. So I would say it's a good read. It's a good analysis of the world. And you've seen that world leaders worldwide has been copying it and reflecting on it, because he was a new voice, a new kid on the block. On climate change, for instance, everybody has met, all these diplomats come together for 20 years to get a climate accord. And they're bored and they know each other. I mean, there's all the points of view have been said forever. And suddenly the Pope comes in with a whole different discourse. He doesn't say who needs to do what. He says, why do people need to do things? So it comes from an inner motivation. And the Pope is liked by many people, so suddenly all the politicians started to quote Pope Francis. And you see that he had a big influence. He also worked behind the scenes to negotiate with difficult countries that are against the international social order, to say, why don't you join this climate talk? Because it is important that we all as humanity work on this issue together. So he also convinced people behind the scenes to join in. So I think he's played an important role in these things. And these businesses working on the same issues, but really concrete on solutions, would like to be associated with it. Because the Pope can't implement solar panels, businesses can. So he needs implementers around the world, and he's open for it. But a lot of priests are very negative about business, mistrust business, because they come from a total different perspective. And I'm trying to make them speak the same language.
Yeah. So again, your role as a diplomat is to mediate between these different worlds, because you see an opportunity and also complementarity in terms of aims and goals there. Yeah. Well, thank you. let's look a little bit at your role more specifically. And we have a question by Lorena Jonker. That's one not here.
There was a very strong list of people who could join and not join, I think. The room is small.
So. We've been
but the speakers were crossed out. That's the question maker.
We've been too strict, perhaps. Is it different? You have served in different positions on different postings. Is it different to serve as an ambassador in an average country, in Germany, the US, in Jordan, or to the Holy See? And what is your experience?
It is very different. I once said as a joke that I feel that I've sent as an ambassador to Mars. I mean, it's a different planet. Why? Because it's a church and it's a state at the same time. And there's one, it's called a theocracy. There's one other one, which is Iran, but that has even more, there's an Ayatollah head of a state. But there you see that it more functions like a state, because it's such a small state as the Vatican. So it does function very differently than other countries. There's no Ministry of Economic Affairs, it's called something else, but there's something similar to it. Or there's an Institute for Religious Work. What would that be? You know it. It's the bank. But it doesn't have the word bank. So the Vatican Bank, what we say, is called the Institute of Religious Works. So everything is lost in translation. And I sometimes feel it's in the middle of Italy, surrounded by Italy. It's like a big spaghetti bowl, and you don't know where, if you pull on one string, where the rest leads. And slowly you try to figure out how things work. And so it does work differently. And the motivations are differently, and the work hours are differently, and everything is different. Yet it is still a state. So I'm still a diplomat representing a state. And it's a bilateral relation, so the Netherlands to the Vatican, but its functions are not so much of a bilateral state. I don't deal with military affairs, no economic affairs, all these issues I don't deal with. No consulate affairs, no passports and things like that. So what I deal with is much more comparable with the United Nations. I deal with peace, poverty, climate, all these big issues. And so you have to compare it, it's a bilateral post with multilateral aspects, with aspects that are more comparable with the United Nations. And therefore, it's a very unique place. And the more different it is, some people say, should it be a state or not? International law, well, it's recognized by everybody. So even though it seems like an exception, then it's a fact, it's a state. But the more different they are, the more room there is for complementarity. So if you compare the Netherlands and Luxembourg, well, nearly everything is the same. So you can create together and do things together, and you've got economies of scale. You can do things bigger if you work together. But if you really want to do new things, it's better to work with a country that is absolutely different than yours. And this is the Vatican. So I think it's a fantastic place to work. Yeah.
It must have been quite a discovery, the first period of you being there, and it kind of reminds me of some of our students that are trained in ethnographic research methods, and you also have to, learn a new language, learn new ways of being and behaving, and find your way through it. And a diplomat's role requires those skills as well, I suppose.
At first, when you start the first time you come to the Vatican is to present your credentials. So you have to present a letter to the head of state, and that's the Pope. And you walk in, and you've got a whole group of Swiss guards to stand there. And then you go up a wooden elevator, and the door opens, and then there's a whole cortege setting up. So there's priests and bishops and gentiluomo. There are guys on white tie with all kinds of medals, and you walk through a big hall, and there's Swiss guard again, and you start feeling smaller and smaller. And you see frescoes here of Michelangelo and whatever. And you keep on walking, and then they made an extra long tour, I think, on purpose to intimidate you. And then you go all along, and then when you get end of a long hallway, you see a door opening, and there's a man in white, and then you totally feel small. History is weighing on you. And then the Pope picks you up again by giving you a nice smile and welcome you again. And then the door closes, and everybody leaves, and you're sitting alone with the Pope. And I have to pinch my arm. I'm representing all of you guys, the Netherlands, to the Pope, that I'm allowed to do this. And because I'm half Spanish, I could speak Spanish with him. The Pope is Argentinian. So we spoke about world affairs and all these issues, and we got caught up in our conversation. It lasted twice as long as it should be. And eventually he pushed a little button, and then the door opens again, and then that's the end of the ceremony. But and so this is how you start, and you think, oh my God, it's different. And then everybody working in the Vatican are like brothers, because they all live together, work together, eat together. They're all priests and sisters. And we are, the diplomats are their cousins. We're part of the family, but a bit more distant. And they try to figure it out first. So they want to see, is this a good family member or a bad one? A black sheep or a white sheep? And then slowly you have to build trust by slowly organizing something. And I tried to organize an event in the Vatican immediately on climate and business. And they said, whoa, not in the Vatican. So I went to Pontifical University, so a university linked to the Vatican, one of the Roman universities. And then slowly one of the cardinals says, oh, I'll do it with you. And then the Secretary of State, which is the number 2 of the Vatican, said, okay, I'll write a letter in support of you. And the last day, we had the Pope that said, okay, you can come and visit me prior to the conference start. So it was really, you started at the periphery and slowly you're pulled in, they're looking at you, studying you, and suddenly they wheel you in if they think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
So it's really trying to figure out how does this country work, but it's been, it's been worthwhile. Yeah.
Very nice to be able to journey a little bit with you in this very interesting experience, a very kind of ritual experience almost, I would say. We have another question also linking to this from Adi van der Woert. Yes.
Hello. Hello. Is he on? Okay. I'm a master student, Adi van der Woert, master student of religion and pluralism. And you told us that the Vatican is a fantastic place to work, and you're really enthusiastic about it. And I think we all believe it is. But what is the darkest part of your work in the Vatican?
So meaning dark in the negative sides of the work?
Yeah.
So actually, before I applied to this job, what people said about this type of job is that you needed an older person, speaks easier to older priests, not too ambitious because things go very slow in the Vatican, and who loves protocol because there's a lot of protocol around there. So I don't fit the 3 criteria. And some of it is true, but the oldness, you don't need to be old to talk to priests because they love it that someone with energy comes in a younger age that needs to prove himself. That's okay. The ambition side, it is difficult. Things go slow in the Vatican. They also purposely put things on slow so they can really study it and don't get thrown off by haste. But if you find your way, you can do a lot of things there. But it was sometimes frustrating. But I found my way around it. But the darker side of it, as a diplomat, you try to build a bridge between the Netherlands and the Vatican. And normally you work towards the country you are accredited to. You try to make them understand your country and make a links. And I'm doing that. But I sometimes need to explain more in the Netherlands what we're doing there and the value of the embassy there than the other around that I need to explain the Vatican and what's happening in the Netherlands. So it's sometimes a reverse role. That's why it's good that we're talking here. I do a lot of interviews. I talk a lot in my ministry to try to push them to do more on religion and diplomacy, and they're doing quite a lot, but it has to grow more. So I have to build more understanding on this side of the bridge. But if that's necessary to build a strong bridge, then that's what you do. But that's been a tough part of my job, is to build enough acceptance and interest on this side of the bridge. But I do notice that once you explain it, there's a lot of enthusiasm. So there's a lot of possibilities.
Linking to what you said about these challenges, the Netherlands, of course, might collaborate with the Vatican quite well on issues of climate and also acknowledge the leadership of Pope Francis on this topic. Yeah. But on other topics, they may encounter the Vatican in a way very much more in opposition. For example, if you talk about issues of gender and sexuality. As a diplomat and also as a person who wants to have this mediation role, building bridges, how do you navigate these differences between the Netherlands and the Vatican? And what is your view or experience in doing so?
So on ethical issues, we stand on opposite sides. And if you look at the UN, every time on these issues, it's the Netherlands and the Vatican. And other countries, like Sweden and other countries, will also sometimes stand, but very often stand behind us. And so we are at the forefront. So there's a big vision from that part of the ministry dealing with these issues. as an enemy. They view the Vatican as an enemy, and the Vatican sees the Netherlands as an enemy. And but I think with there's a huge gap between our worldviews there. But just to focus on these topics would be, I don't know how much we can convince on ethical issues on the side of the Vatican and vice versa. There's not much win there. I do deal with these issues, but I think if we can work on all the other issues at the same time, climate, migration, peace negotiations, human rights and poverty, we can actually build a coalition on things that we can work together very well, become friends, know each other, and then not have a debate on these difficult issues, but a real dialogue. And I think that's my strategy. And so I waited a year before introducing the difficult issues. But once we built the trust and they reeled me in, I invited human rights activists working on persecution of gay people to come and talk and have a dialogue. And actually, persecution of minorities, even from your, if it's a minority from a sexual orientation side, the church is absolutely against persecution of minorities. And sometimes there's certain countries, due to the cultural context, that the church also becomes homophobic and attacks homosexuals or doesn't stop that. And then sometimes a reminder from the Vatican helps. So we've once sent to one country, convinced one of the cardinals to send a letter to the bishops' conference of that country, to Uganda, to remind them persecution is bad, whomever it is, and for whatever reason. And there I see that the collaboration is flawless, is perfect. So on that issue, so within the difficult issues of LGBTI and with persecution bit, we can work together. And so that's where you try to find the sweet spots and make that work. But that's only possible if you work in other areas.
So you can build trust.
Yeah, build trust.
Build trust, find common ground, and agree to disagree on certain issues as well, perhaps. Yep. Thank you very much. On to a different subject, and that is related to the recent visit of our King Willem-Alexander and Queen Maxima to Rome. Ariane van den Anker, do you want to ask your question?
My name is Ariane Anker. I'm a master's student here at the faculty as well. I'm going to ask my question in Dutch, but I think Brenda will translate. I hope so at least, because I don't know all the terms in it. U bent de bevelhebberstaf van Willem van Oranje op het spoor gekomen. En u heeft er ook voor gezorgd dat de leider van de Jezuïeten heeft ingestemd met een bruikleen hier in Nederland. En naar aanleiding daarvan heeft u in een interview gezegd dat religie niet meer staat voor oorlog en ruzie, maar voor eenheid. En kunt u iets zeggen over hoe erfgoed kan zorgen voor eenheid?
So I'll translate. And I'll give you a bit of context. He said, how can cultural heritage help support unity amongst Christians or religion? We had a state visit of our king and queen to the Vatican, and it's the first ever state visit that a head of state of the Netherlands has done to the Vatican. Queen Beatrix, the predecessor, she has visited, but in an official visit capacity, but it wasn't a state visit, it wasn't on the highest level. Because then it was very sensitive still in the Netherlands between Protestants and Catholics, and the Catholic Church was going through a very tough time in the Netherlands, and there was a lot of anger. So it was a difficult time, and so now the time was right to do this trip. And while I was starting to prepare it 3/4 of a year before, a friend of mine of the Cervantes Institute, Spanish Cultural Institute in Rome, I had coffee with him, and as you do in Italy, a cappuccino at the bar, and he said, "Oh, I didn't mention to you before, but once I did research in a monastery in Catalonia, in Spain, and I saw in the inventory list that the commander staff of William of Orange, the founder of the Netherlands, founding father of the Netherlands, is there, and I don't know if it's really there or what it is. I haven't seen it." But you probably know about it. And I called the Royal Archives here and other people here, and they said, we don't know about this thing. And so this commander staff is about this tall, this thick. It's and knights used to have it in their hand, the commander, in battle, because between all the knights you would see who is the boss, the guy with this stick. And it's an old Roman custom that was taken through the years. So. And it had a function because it's like a prolongation of your arm, so it makes it longer. So if someone points in battle with a lot of chaos, with that stick to one or the other direction, people can actually see what they're pointing at and things like that. So That command of staff was most likely given by William of Orange to his brother, Lodewijk. And Lodewijk took the army to battle against the Spanish in Spain. And either he got it from his brother or he had it made in name of his brother when he got the command. And he died in that battle. And that baton, as we call it, this commander's staff, came in the hands of the Spanish general, took it back to Spain, to Catalonia. And remained in family archives until 1921. The family died out, and the last of the requesens gave the archives to the Jesuits. And the Jesuits kept it, and they had no particular value for this thing because it's not a religious object, a military object. So they didn't really talk about it. And it was just lying there. And we didn't know about it. So we stumbled upon it, and I thought, wouldn't it be great? It's like finding a small Rembrandt somewhere or something undiscovered. Some people get really excited about it because the historical thing, other people say it's just a stick, and yeah, both is right. But it has a lot of symbolic value. And what you said, it reminds us of, and that's why I wanted it part of the state visit. So I asked the Jesuits if we can have it. We couldn't have it permanently because it's in Spanish law. It says it's cultural heritage, and you can't give it away. But we can have it on loan. And I said, well, wouldn't it be great to have it in the Vatican during the state visit? Because it symbolizes that the war between Spain and the Netherlands was partly a war of religion. And religion stood for division and conflict. And the Catholic Church, the Protestants have evolved over time to today, where there's a lot of religious unity. We've seen the 500 years of Reformation. The Pope went to Lund, to Sweden, to commemorate. There's a lot of bridges being built amongst the Christian faiths. And it stands for peace. So it's unity and peace today. So this baton reminds us of the past and reaffirms that today we've made a huge shift and that today we're closer together than we've ever been in the past. So that's why I wanted this baton. And the second nice thing was we had King Willem-Alexander. He had in his hand something that belonged to the founding father of the Netherlands. So it went from William of Orange to the current Willem-Alexander of Orange. And so the circle of history also there was finalized. So I was actually happy when the thing actually arrived in Rome that it actually wasn't falling apart. It was in good shape. I didn't know. I didn't see it before. So and there we had it. So it was a nice symbolic event. And that baton will now go to Soesterberg, to our National Military Museum, an exhibition on William of Orange in April. So you can see it for yourselves. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much. A story about how a military object associated with division, relation to religion, has been rebranded. I would almost say as a symbol of people building dialogue and relationships again. We're moving towards the closing of our session, but we have a couple of questions, so don't leave yet. We have Tina Fischer who wants to ask you a question. Tina, where are you?
Well, my name is Tina Visser. I'm a master student of Religion, Conflict and Globalization here in Groningen and Political Science. And I have this question. What should the Ministry of Foreign Affairs do to implement religion better into foreign policy? And how could you contribute to that as ambassador to the Holy See?
So one is on Islam. We're making steps to it, but it's not in our DNA of Dutch people to talk about religion. So it is work in progress, but it's being made. What I do, for instance, if I write, the Pope is now in Colombia, and in Colombia the local priests have been for 30 years talking about peace, to create a culture of peace, so that not everything divides into two camps. On top of that, the local bishops have created a platform for political dialogue. On that platform, the politicians have made an agreement with the rebel group, with FARC. And the Pope is the third level, so you've priests, the bishops, and now the Pope, who comes now as the cherry on the cake to support not this peace agreement per se, but the peace process. Because he says this is a political decision, and not everybody in Colombia is happy with this peace agreement, but he's for peace agreements in plural. So he's for the process that maybe they can renegotiate this or renegotiate it, but he won't take a political decision what the right peace agreement is, the outcome. And so he goes there. So you see that this all plays a big role. Then I write, for instance, now a joint report. I do research on this side with our embassy in Colombia to both write a report on the Pope's visit. And that helps that embassy to think more through a religious lens as well, or like a religious diplomacy lens, and not just from the lens they're used to in Colombia. And I do the same thing with on geopolitics. How does Putin use the Orthodox Church for its geopolitical goals? Is he using it or not? And so I co-write that with a whole bunch of embassies in the region and influence sphere of Russia. So to open up their minds, and some have written on it, some have never written on it. So to just to help them develop that lens. So that's how I'm trying to push the boundaries of religion and diplomacy.
You mentioned religious literacy as something that is important also for people who are not affiliated with any religion.
Yeah.
So how do you see that in relation to the work of diplomats?
Yes, I mean, I think it's growing, and I said it before, the younger generation has more of a tendency to study it than the older generation. But it's hard work. If you don't do something in the ministry if you do it for 3 years, it can die out. If you do something for 5 years, it probably becomes part of our DNA. So now the idea is to continue with this trend of religious literacy, which definitely happens to all ambassadors that go to the Middle East, because it's so essential part of their work, but also elsewhere in the world that trend has started, and I hope it will continue and solidify and deepen to also other religions besides Islam, and then we would have a very good. It would be part of our DNA, and I think that would be very useful. Just another tool in our belt. And if we're not capable of doing so, then at least be open to work with other organizations that are capable of doing so.
Yeah. So things do not only need time at the Vatican, but sometimes also
Absolutely.
at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Broadening a bit on this theme of religious literacy, there was a question from Theo Appeldoorn.
The strapping young man is one of your students?
My name is Theo Appeldoorn. I study early Islam here.
Oh, fantastic.
And my question is the following. We live in a world where we are in constant daily contact with religion, or in confrontation with religion. And speaking about the curriculum in high school in Holland, in the Netherlands, would you think it a good idea that to give students an option to study in their school religion?
I think an option, one could always be open for it. I haven't studied it, but I think it's always useful to get some understanding, if it would be maatschappijleer or something else, to understand your society. And this element is always useful to have. I think nearly more so important that it's incorporated in other studies once you go to university level. To have the combination of religious studies and international relations is obviously very important. But also if you look at of that in combination with business administration, because a lot of ethical issues that are there, or engineering. If you look at the innovation that's happening in Silicon Valley, and that there's never a question asked if it's a good thing or not. Yesterday I spoke to someone who said in Silicon Valley they developed a plastic that can last 10,000 years for like a conductor for like a glasvezel, I call it, wire. But it's but 10,000 years. Do we really want something to last for 10,000 years? I mean, 10,000 years. Christ was 2,000 years ago. So, is that ethical? And said, well, they don't want to talk about that ethical. They want to say we can do it, and then we'll do it because we can. So the ethical questions, it would be so useful to have at least ethics or religious studies or anything that thinks differently to be incorporated for engineering. Because it's easier to find an engineering solution to something than ask you the ethical question. And so I would say in nearly every discipline, I would say branch out or get students to take a course on the issues that you're focused on. That would be very, very healthy for all of us, yeah.
So it's not only about having knowledge about Christianity, Islam, Hinduism or Buddhism, but also being able to ask these reflexive questions in relation to what you do in society and what they mean.
And you see that all the priests are studying ethics as well. I mean, it's not just religious studies, but that all comes from one field, from my perspective, that is very necessary. Yeah.
Well, we've come to the closing of the interview, and just as one kind of last summing up question, if you would say what the relevance is of knowledge of religion, not only to students of theology and religious studies, but to students from various different disciplines? What would be...
I kind of said that, because that's indeed, but we can expand on it. No, but I think indeed, and for engineering, for the ones who are actually the fields that are furthest away from religion, there's the greatest chance of added value, and I also see in big conferences like the World Economic Forum, all the religious people are put together in one room. Why? Well, they call it interreligious dialogue, but about what? So yeah, if you're academics, you can discuss a lot of things, but why don't you put one religious leader on every other panel, and then in the end of the day have them come together and compare notes on what sort of questions they got and what response they got, but don't put them together in a room. So I would say for everybody who's in this room, branch out, be in a different panel, don't just talk to each other, and see what the added value, and then come together and discuss what you've learned. And I think then you can be a big impact in the world. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. It was a very inspiring talk, very inspiring interview. And on behalf of the faculty, I want to thank you for your presence here, for taking the time to answer these questions in such a lively and very informative way. And I would like to follow up on your plea to branch out. And for those of you who are coming from other faculties, we welcome you to take some of the information we have on following minors at our faculty or a master's program, combining, because the study of religion, we believe it's important not because whether you're religious or not, but because the theme, the topic of religion and culture matters. And that's what we study. And that's something you see how useful it can be for diplomacy, for business, and for many, many other areas in life and society. So I thank you very much for that. I thank all of you for your presence here, those who asked questions, those who helped organizing all of this. Brenda, also thank you very, very much. And if you want more information, there is here. We also have, of course, the website of the university, rug.nl/ggw, rug.nl/ggw. Exactly. For those of you who've registered, in 15 minutes, we'll have the opening of our academic year. It will be in the Doopsgezinde Kerk, a few meters north, and we hope to see all of you there as well. Thank you very, very much.